This is the most important law in power that I want you to engrave in your brain right now as you listen to me. And it's the following. Everybody has insecurities and has an ego. And the worst thing you can do for your boss, for your colleagues, for the people underneath you is to violate their ego, to make them feel insecure. You will pay a price for it. They will resent you. They will work against you. They will betray you in the end. People who are toxic, they don't show it immediately, but you have to recognize that these are people that are probably going to use you. The most important law in power that I want you to engrave in your brain right now as you listen to me, and it's the following. Everybody has insecurities and has an ego. And the worst thing you can do for your boss, for your colleagues, for the people underneath you is to violate their ego, to make them feel insecure. You will pay a price for it. They will resent you. They will work against you. They will betray you in the end. So never lose sight that everybody around you has an ego and has insecurities.
If you're thinking about going upstream, you're an employee with your boss. In short, kind of do good, do your work, selectively compliment them. But then on the flip side, the boss, you recommend have everybody do the work for you, but then take credit.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to expand on that. What's your thoughts with that?
So the law came from, I worked in Hollywood unfortunately, for like 10 years. It kind of inspired 48 Laws. But I say unfortunately because I hated Hollywood. But I would work for a film director who would be doing a screenplay, and I would write large portions of the dialogue and I would contribute to it. Nobody ever knew that. It was always his name on it. Right? He got all the fame, all the glory, all the attention. And at the time, kind of bothered me. I was kind of resentful. And then when I wrote the 48 Laws of Power, I had this idea that, Robert, you did the wrong thing. You were stupid. The game of power should have been, that's how things are, right? When you look at a politician who gives a great speech and everybody's going, wow, Barack Obama, that was an amazing speech.
Someone wrote that speech.
Somebody wrote it. He never wrote it. And you never know that name who wrote it. You might, but no one ever gets that attention. When you see some journalist giving some really interesting monologue on television, somebody else wrote that, did all the research, gave him all the notes for that. Comedians. Bill Maher doesn't write his material. He's got a team of people writing all the jokes, right? You never see them. You never know them. Maybe the credits roll by really quickly, right? So that's how powerful people operate, okay? And I should have just accepted it. I should have been more humble. I should have said, that's how the jungle is. There are people who take the credit for it. And if I didn't resent it, I wouldn't have lost energy. If you get too worked up about things, if everything is so dramatic, emotional, if you're reacting against everything, it drains you of energy. It clouds your mind. You're not a good strategist. You're not a good warrior in life. You're not a good power player because your brain is just sinking into this mud of reactions and emotions. So I should have just been more zen about it. This is how the game is. Eventually, if I keep writing this good dialogue and stuff, he's going to let me take credit, or I will get credit for it eventually if I'm humble, if I'm serious, if I learn the game, if I play it right. If you play the game of power right, you read the book, you understand it, you will be rewarded at the end of the game, right? You will be rewarded. So I wrote that chapter because people in power use that and know about it, but also for you, the person starting out or who's younger, to understand that that's what's going to be happening to you. People are going to be taking your work and taking credit for it, but just accept that.
How much of avoiding outshining the master is really just about knowing who you're dealing with? It seems like it's very contextual to who the actual master or boss is.
Yes, it is, and it's nuanced. And some people, if you work really hard, you do a great job, and you get attention for it, they won't mind. Your boss will be fine. They'll be happy for you. There'll be no resentment. There'll be no pettiness. There'll be no envy. Great. If you have a boss like that. But do you want me to tell you the percentage of bosses who will be like that? It's probably about 5%. Okay? I'm just throwing that number up. That's what I think, right? But if that's who your boss is, fantastic. Wunderbar. Love it. Go for it. But the chances are that they're probably not. So law number one is understand that probably they're insecure. Probably you're going to trigger their egos. and be a little bit careful, but understand as well, what are their insecurities? What is going to trigger that? So to give you an example from my own life, because I violated this law once, I worked for an awful, awful television show back in the 90s, whose name I won't even mention. I was a researcher for it, okay? And I was the best researcher on this crap show. And best researcher meant that the stories I found were the ones that were most used. I had a higher percentage, right? Kind of went to my head. Wow, I'm hot shit, you know? I'm by far the best researcher on this crew. And I had a boss, a woman, and she ended up thinking I had an attitude. Like, Robert just thinks he's so great, okay? And one day we had a meeting, and I hated these meetings because they were such bullshit. Nothing is accomplished, just people talking. It's just political crap. That's how I felt. So I was kind of like doodling in my notebook. I wasn't listening. She goes, Robert, something wrong here? Do you think you're better than everybody else? Ended up, she started really harassing me at that. Not sexually. She started harassing me, my job, right? And eventually I just quit because I couldn't handle it anymore. I was sick of it. I hated the job. I hated her, and I hated all the politicking that was involved. Shouldn't life be about doing the best job, getting the best stories? Isn't that what matters? No, that's not what matters in business or politics. What matters is pleasing people, stroking their egos. I triggered her insecurity, which was she didn't feel like she was in authority. She didn't feel like I respected her. That was her weakness. If I understood that, maybe I would have played it differently, but I wouldn't have played it differently because I wanted to quit that job. Maybe.
One of the biggest things I get asked is, Jay, how do I deal with negative people? How do I deal with negative people in my family? How do I deal with negative people in my friend circle? How do I deal with negative people at work? In close, intimate circles, I feel a lot of people feel they're dealing with negativity.
Well, it all depends on the details, the kind of negative person you're dealing with. There are several kind of ways of looking at it, some kind of micro and some kind of much larger. The larger picture is we all have negative traits. We all have dark traits, right? And so you kind of, if you have this idea that it's just humans, human beings are like this, it's like a flower or a rock or a tree, it has its nature. I just accept it. I accept people for who they are, and I deal with them on that level. I don't judge them, etc. Now, of course, when you're dealing with negative people, it can be very difficult because negative people like to stir up a lot of drama around them. And that's the kind of power that they get. They like the attention that they get from making people upset, from pulling on your emotions, right? So you have to have this kind of larger look at them where it's not about me, right? They're dealing with their own issues, their own problems. There's a history behind it. It could be their parents, it could be their family, it could be their spouse, their children, whatever. And they're venting it on me in this particular moment, but it's not personal. I tell people, don't take everything so personally, right? But then, so there are all these different levels, and it all really depends on the specifics because a lot of people come to me for advice. But a lot of times you're enmeshed with a negative person, like it's your boss, it's your spouse, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very difficult to do what I'm talking about, right? And so you have to try and get a little bit of distance from them. You have to be able to say to yourself, they're not me, right? They have their own problems. I'm separate from them. The sense of being separate from them is very liberating, right? So they have issues and they're trying to drag me into it and they're trying to drag me down. But I'm not them. I have my own life and I'm not going to get involved. Sometimes you need to have empathy, but sometimes you need to shut that off. And so the best thing in life, though, is that's why I say there's just so many angles to approach this from, is if they're like a deep narcissist, and that's probably the most common type of negative person you deal with in the world today, and we all have come across this. The power that you have is to recognize people like that before you get involved with them and to not get involved with them, right? And so they have signs, things that you can pick up in advance. People who are toxic, I don't know if it's toxic and negative are the same here. They don't show it immediately. They're good at deceiving you. They can be very charming. They can be very dramatic. They pull you in with their great stories. Sometimes they're even charismatic. A lot of important CEOs in the world, people like Elon Musk, are raging narcissists. They appear very exciting and you want to get to know them. But you have to recognize that these are people that are probably going to use you, right? They don't see you as an individual. And the people you associate with, we're very, as humans, we're very open to the emotions of other people, right? And so the people you associate with have a huge role on who you are and the energy you have, your daily life, et cetera, et cetera. And so you have to be very, very careful who you let into your life, right? And God, Jay, I don't know. There's so many different angles to
Yeah.
approach it from.
No, that's a really thoughtful.
I tell people that don't judge people as far as who are you going to let into your life. Don't be deceived by the appearances. Don't judge people based on their intelligence, on their charm, on whether they're good or bad, etc. Judge them on their character, whether they have a weak or a strong character.
What are some of the signals, the signs we can look out for? Because I think what you just said is so true that we naturally get attracted to people's appearance, intelligence, charisma, access, because we haven't really been trained to view character.
No.
So I remember when I lived in the monastery, the highest quality or character trait that was considered the epitome of internal emotional evolution was humility. And so when you met someone who was humble and you met someone who didn't have false ego, they were considered of high character. And we were trained in order to understand that. But in the modern world, that isn't how the material world works. We're almost attracted to people who can come off arrogant and showboaty. And even if we sense we don't like that, we still believe that person has power. And so what are things that we have to look out for?
Well, also, there are people who appear to be humble, but they're not really humble. There's a
Agreed.
lot of people now who feign humility because it's seen as a positive trait.
Yes.
So humans are born actors, and you have to kind of look behind the mask. So I tell people, I view it as strong or weak character. A strong character is a person who can take criticism, right? Who can work with other people, right? Who can deal with stressful situations, who can handle responsibility. And if there's something goes wrong, they take, I'm to blame for it. They don't look at other people. There's somebody you can rely on. You lean on them, and there's something there to lean on. You can rely on them in situations. A weak character is somebody who cannot take criticism. And that is probably the number one characteristic, the worst trait, I think, in people, and a definite trait of negativity, is somebody who can't take any kind of criticism, right? They're so defensive. So that means they can get away with anything. They can say anything they want, and there's just like a wall, a shell around them, right? So the ability in a work situation, in a relationship, to take criticism and be able to use it constructively is an incredibly useful and powerful trait to me that reveals strong character. How people handle stress is a really good sign of their character. So in a work situation, people are good at faking it and pretending that they're very strong. But when it gets really stressful and there's a lot of pressure on it, the mask falls off and they reveal that they can't handle it. They're too weak. They're reacting to everything. They can't get out of the moment. They're so impatient, and fragile. And so the ability to handle stress shows that somebody has something strong inside of them, right? How they handle power, right? So when people are kind of climbing up the ladder in a group or in a job, they generally try and pretend like they're with the group. But once they have power, that all falls off, and they can become abusive, and they feel like they can get away with any things that they couldn't get away with before. They treat people below them miserably, etc. So when people have power, how do they handle it? Are they responsible? Do they suddenly become somebody different, or do they maintain the character that they had beforehand? Right? What kind of partners do they choose? Do they choose a spouse, a husband, a girlfriend, etc.? Somebody that they can push around, somebody that's inferior to them so that they can feel better about themselves? How do they look when they're playing like a game or they're in outdoor activities or something that has something to do with work? Are they so competitive they have to win at everything, even when it's like outside of that kind of environment, you know? These are kind of traits that
Mm.
help me sort of judge a person's character.
Yeah, and these are often the things that we either ignore or we actually let them kind of fall by the wayside or don't pay enough attention to them because we think, oh no, but they're so smart and they're so this. And I wonder how much of that is also like, what does that say about us that we often get attracted to the wrong things within people? What does that say about us? Does that make us a strong or weak character?
I know that I tend to get involved with narcissistic people. It's a weakness of mine, right? And maybe it's because of my upbringing, and maybe it's because I feel a kind of emptiness inside of me, and that their charm and the attention that they pretend to give you is kind of enchanting or casts a spell on you and it draws you in. Yeah, so if you're dealing with your own weaknesses and your own emptiness inside, you're going to be drawn to people who fill that up. Or you're going to be drawn to causes and charismatic leaders that pretend to give you a purpose in your life because you don't have a purpose, but they have it for you, kind of thing. So a lot of it has to do, yeah, with ourselves, and we're even attracted to negative people, and there are people who have patterns in their life where they deliberately choose the worst kind of person for them, right? And over and over and over again, because at least that makes them feel alive. At least the pain of it, gives them a sense of something dramatic, and so they deliberately bring on that kind of pain. So it's complicated, yeah.